I'm Charlie Bradley. I've been a Whitlamite for about 50 years. And I wasn't there yesterday morning, but I was at the town hall in the evening. And wasn't that wonderful presentation enough to raise the question of should I not be ashamed to be a member of the Australian Labor Party? Where a left-wing Prime Minister, hang on, I don't have them facts right there, so I'll just say where a left-wing influenced government refused to proceed with a Charter of Human Rights, even though it was fully recommended. And surely that Charter of Human Rights is absolutely essential to carry with it the rights that you spoke of with regard to the asylum seekers, but also with regard to rights for Indigenous people, and for rights with regard to education, and for rights with regard to health. And turning our back on that is a stain that surely has to be removed.
Hi, I'm Pat Ranald from the Fair Trade Network, and I want to ask a question about trade policy. We're a very broad network that's been campaigning for some time and have had some influence on Labor policy to try to get some principles into the trade policy, particularly the idea that trade agreements shouldn't prevent governments from acting in the public interest in areas like access to medicines or tobacco control, and they shouldn't allow, foreign corporations to sue governments. So I just want to hear from both speakers about the left policy on trade agreements, and in particular whether they will fight to get, given that Labor and some others can influence what happens in the Senate, to vote against what I consider to be really bad trade agreements being made by the coalition government. The two that are coming up now are the China Free Trade Agreement and the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, one of whom mainly involved in China, the other one being driven by the US.
Hi, my name is John Doherty. I'd like to ask a question for both. Actually, mostly for Steve, actually. In relation to the left position on issues involving security, and in particular in relation to the media, particularly and in relation to national security issues.
Jolene asked a question about national security. I assume it goes to the three tranches of legislation that have been before this session of Parliament. The first that dealt with a whole range of things, the most obnoxious being the stuff around the capacity of journalists and others, or anybody frankly, to be prosecuted for revealing details of a national security operation. We have taken a view that within the left we've had a good discussion of that, and take the view that that legislation needs to be amended. There's two other tranches that are there before the House. The second has to do with foreign fighters and a bunch of other things. Again, we've put forward about 50 amendments to that piece of legislation, which we are backing in. I think the government will probably eventually accede to all of those. The third, and I've got to say I have more problems with the second than the one that's catching all the attention at the moment, and that's the stuff around data retention and metadata. The reason it's catching all the attention is it's something that's tangible and people can sort of understand it. Everyone has a computer or a mobile phone. They can kind of get the fact that they don't feel very comfortable about somebody holding access to those sorts of records. The fact is that mobile phone companies already keep that stuff. And they do all sorts of things with your data, including data mining and a whole range of stuff, particularly when they're also involved in the provision of services. I feel a bit more comfortable about the government having to seek a warrant to get access to that stuff than a private company having access to that stuff, I've got to say. So I know it's the one that's got all the attention. It's not the one that I'm most concerned about. I'm most concerned I'm most concerned about the stuff that we've flagged that will amend and the stuff that was in the second tranche around around the foreign fighters. If I stand up, it's probably a bit better as well. Charlie, on the proud Whitlamite, good on you, mate. I don't think you should ever feel ashamed about being hungry and anxious for more progressive social reform.
Well said.
I don't think you should ever feel angry about that. But it's my view that we've got to look at the donut and the hole. Okay, focus on the things that celebrate the stuff that we have achieved while feeling hungry for the things that we want to continue to move on. Over the last term of what was frankly a fairly fractious parliament, we moved over 70 amendments to remove anti-discriminatory provisions from legislation in the area of same-sex couples. We enshrined for the first time for people who are interested in this stuff the right to collectively bargain, which has not been a cornerstone of our industrial relations law for over 107 years in this country, longer if you count pre-federation. So again, some important rights issues were maintained. The main fight, I've got to say now, is hanging on to what we've got. We've had the win on 18C, but they'll be back at us. They want the right to be bigots. We want the right to live free from discrimination. That's where the fight is at the moment. So don't be angry, mate, but focus, celebrate the stuff we've done, and let's then campaign around the stuff we want to achieve. Yeah. On the trade stuff, Pat, the amount of information that we are getting as a parliament is limited from this government, and the fight is to actually get the details of what's being discussed. As I know you know this probably better than anyone. So the fight is to get the information. We are having robust discussions within our parliamentary caucus on all of those issues. I am not by instinct opposed to trade, and I know you are not either. As a nation, we have a lot more to gain than we have to lose from an open trading economy, but nobody should kid themselves that the international market is a level playing field. It quite simply is not.
I think Stephen's really covered the field on both of those. I'll just say this, on trade, obviously, Pat's very well tied into our networks and has often had a major impact on the position we'll take. I do anticipate it'll be a item of debate at national conference, but it's moving so quickly at the moment that it's not clear where that ground will be fought on. And briefly on the Human Rights Charter, which is really something that has been a source of real debate inside the Labor Party. And for me, I think the real value of that sort of instrument or that sort of discussion is, as a society, as a country, I think the idea that you set your principles in a moment of calm, not in a moment of crisis, is just fundamental. That's actually how you get good results as a society, when you've had the chance to reflect on what your fundamental principles as a country are. So I think it's a very important debate. I also think, though, we've got to acknowledge that it's a debate that's come off the boil a bit, and it's one of those issues that, if we're going to win on, really needs to be the subject of some big debate and a big movement on that question.
Thanks very much. Jim Mappel is my name. I first of all, greetings to Stephen, who's former National Secretary of my union, CPSU. The reason I'm saying that is that I want to raise a critical issue for the left, and that is defence and extension of the public sector in this country. That is actually, in my opinion, almost the number one issue we're facing here under this Abbott government. I don't know how many people know this. We have an outrageous situation at the moment that the government is offering zero pay rises in the public sector. It's almost unbelievable that this is going ahead. And they're also selling off Medicare, the Medicare system in the Department of Human Services, and to me this is an absolutely critical issue we face. The question that I'm asking is, you know, we have to take a principled and consistent stand, and Stephen mentioned that among the major leaders of the Labor left was Anna Bligh. Now, I spent 25 years in Queensland, and the Labor Party in Queensland has been destroyed by what the Anna Bligh government did, which was to sell off massive sectors of the public sector. And as soon as that started to happen, that is what led to the destruction of the Labor government and virtually decimation of the Labor Party. And also I could argue on the side that related issues affected the New South Wales state government as well in relation to the power industry. So I really think I'd like to ask the speakers, you know, where does the Labor left stand now on the principal question of we oppose all privatisations, we defend the public sector, we defend the workforce in the public sector, and we take an absolutely clear-cut stand on that, because if there's any other issue which I think the Labor left should stand on, that's the one.
I think they're good points about what's happened both in New South Wales and Queensland. I'll just make this point, that rather than just focus on privatisation, which is a crucial issue, and I think you've raised some important points about it, the real fight about this at National Conference is that one I referred to, which is about tax and making sure there is not a small government agenda driven back into Labor's plan to return to government. And that big debate about the size and role of government, what role it should play, how big it should not be the subject of some artificial cap on what we're saying is the amount we tax as a proportion of GDP. So it's a similar question. It means that, you know, yes, the left will oppose many privatisations. It doesn't mean every single one. We have to win on this issue about the size and role of government though, and making sure there's enough tax raised to do the things Labor wants to do in government, and to not end up in the sort of debt and deficit attack from the Conservatives that was the direct result of not raising tax.
The public service is not a magic pudding. You can't keep going back to it when you want to find savings somewhere to meet a political commitment that you've made somewhere else, and regrettably that is something that has been going on for several decades. And if you want evidence of where the pressure points are, go to a Centrelink office. Go to a Centrelink office on a Monday morning. Go to a Medicare office, and you know you've got a queue going out the door. These are the signs of pressure points. Try and phone a Centrelink call centre and find out how long you're on the line. And the public service is not a magic pudding. You can't keep cutting it and expect it to do the same job that it's always done. And for those of us who think there is a role of government, and then we're quite proud of the fact that we can introduce a national disability insurance scheme, introduce paid maternity leave, introduce improvements in pension and other welfare benefits, and have all of that turn to muck because there aren't enough staff in the delivery agencies to explain it or deliver it. And we understand the frailties of that style of politics. So we've got to be willing, as John said, to defend our public service and our public sector. Great institutions like the ABC, and why it is in the national interest that we fund it properly to do the job that we all expect it to do, to keep Abbott good to his promise that he wouldn't cut it or the SBS, which he is currently doing, and to have a sustainable taxation system. And can I say, as we go down this path, we are going to find all sorts of unusual allies. Jim, you've mentioned the pay disputes that the public sector is going into. Who'd have thought the Australian Defence Force would be our best allies in that dispute?
So you mentioned about the role of government, and I think that's been a discussion that's been going on in the United States for quite some time now, and I think the Tea Party has taken a fairly extreme view of the whole thing. What's the view of the ALP left? More importantly, what is the view of the ALP itself? What is the role of the government? What is the philosophy? So that, you know, that can determine to a certain extent the policies in health and education, etc.
I think John said in his talk that he'd come back to the issue of asylum seekers, but I don't think that actually happened. And I find it very difficult at the moment to say what Labour's policy and what the Labour left policy is on that issue, and I think it has become something of a touchstone at the moment, so I'd like some clarification. I was quite surprised to hear that Julia Gillard was on the left. I didn't actually realise that. I mean, the policy, the appalling policy that completely ignores human rights that the Abbott government is following at the moment was adopted, first of all, by Labour Prime Ministers, the policy of sending people to Christmas, to Manus Island and to Nauru. And recently, Richard Marles said Labour could decide to send back the votes like the Conservatives are doing, and was whipped into line by the party leader. What is the policy? It's very confusing.
My name's Adrian Graves. It's said that Whitlam's greatest achievement was in forming a coalition of the progressive forces of Australian politics. It was that was the precondition to winning government and making the reforms possible. Interestingly, he has that in common with the parties in Greece and Spain at the moment who are opposed to austerity. So we might learn something from Eurocommunism, actually. But having said that, what are the plans of the Labour left to form a broad coalition of the progressive forces in Australian politics to win power? And in particular, what are your plans to form a collaborative relationship with the Greens? Because without that, I think it's going to be very difficult to win government.
I'll do it. Varley, you asked about the size of government. I think this is an area where we can win the public debate, and we will win the public debate. And healthcare is probably one of our best examples. You simply have to ask the question, what country in the world would you rather be sick? What country in the world would you rather need to have to go to a public hospital in?
Germany.
Scandinavia.
I reckon Australia's pretty good. I'd put Australia up there, to be frank. I'd put Australia up there. And it's certainly not any of the small government examples that those on the right like to proffer. So we can win the argument on the size of government if we have the courage to do that. I don't agree with the contention that there isn't a role for the private sector in all areas that have traditionally been seen as the purview of the government. I think there is a role, but I certainly think where the Conservatives are at the moment in relation to healthcare in particular, and so many other areas of government services is not where we want to be. It is about taxation, it is about revenue, and it is about ideology, and we've got to be able to win those debates. Can I deal then with the issue of asylum seekers? I suspect that it is a touchstone issue for everybody in this room. Regrettably, it's not a touchstone issue, in a good way at least, for the majority of Australians. Regrettably. And I spoke on this. We probably raised this issue as a left. I won't tell you the ins and outs of the debate at every single caucus throughout the course of the 43rd Parliament. Doug and myself and Melissa and a bunch of others got up at every single caucus and raised this particular issue. As we did this, we were fully aware of the fact that we had either or were losing the public debate on the matter. There is absolutely no doubt about
Try
that.
leading.
Well, the comment is made, tried leading. There were many of us who did and are willing to continue to do that. We still need to have a clear debate on what a successful outcome looks like on this, and I don't even think we're close to that yet. What a successful policy looks like on this. I don't think anyone could point to the Labor left over the 43rd Parliament and say that we weren't willing to take a leadership position on it. Frankly, nobody could seriously say that we weren't willing to do that. As we were losing votes and dealing with all sorts of issues over that Parliament, we held a line on this. Frankly, and you don't have to take my word for it, those who say it's a touchstone issue, the latest Scanlon Institute did a body of work along with Deakin University in Victoria, I think it was, on social inclusion and social attitudes. This is a touchstone issue with 12% of the population. I wish that was wrong, but that is the fact. So trying to craft the sorts of policies that you and I might feel comfortable with in that environment is nothing short of difficult. And anyone who wants to sort of come to my electorate. I don't live in the inner city of Sydney or Melbourne or Adelaide or Perth. I live in regional Australia. My electorate looks a lot like those far western suburbs of Sydney. It looks a lot like that for the most part. And I can tell you, when I was door knocking, it was either the first, second or third question that I ever got asked. And these are people, oftentimes they're on welfare. Oftentimes they've got the bum out of their pants. The first, second or third question they're asking. The last boat person they would have seen was James Cook. But these are the issues. So we have lost the debate. We need to win it. And if anybody expects a progressive party to be able to introduce the sorts of policies sustainably in this country, the way the debate is at the moment, without winning it in the public, then frankly you're wrong. It's got to be won in the public.
I just wanted to address particularly the issue about the broad coalition, and I think particularly the relationship with the Greens quite directly. I think you can clearly see from the issues that have been raised in questions, or that Stephen and I have talked about tonight, on many of those issues we can only ever win that big public debate if there is some united progressive grouping across society that's going to argue the case for it. That's just crucial. That's a precondition for winning on any of these issues. And I do think that that is easier today than it has been for a generation of voters, as we've seen people really face up to the fact, confronted by Abbott and by Liberal governments at a state level all along the East Coast. A whole generation of voters have been reminded of exactly what the Liberals as a party are about. And it really is a dramatic difference to many of the things we believe in. It really is, it's been systematic cuts to the sort of health and education services, the sort of social justice goals of government really being put right into the back seat. So I do think there's a real opportunity at this moment in history to have that discussion with voters and with, some frank discussions between the political parties. I think we also have to have the honest discussion about the fact that having two progressive political parties occupying the space, particularly with optional preferential voting, and this is mainly the case in Queensland and New South Wales, means Conservatives win more often. Yeah. And that is very confronting, but it means that it is the case that, progressives are losing even when the majority of the population might take a progressive view as they're walking into a ballot box. So I think the conditions are there for a very good discussion on that, but it requires an honest assessment of where we've got to at the moment and some of the real consequences that has for for citizens in states or around the country.
I'd like to say a couple of things about that too. Firstly, we will and do work with the Greens and other parties in government. We do that. We do it on a weekly basis in Parliament on issues that we agree on. And just as we do with other parties, all sorts of weird alliances get built. But we do actually have some fundamental differences around some issues. It's right that somebody gets up in a forum like this and says, what is Labor doing to work with other progressive forces? I would hope that with equal force and vigour somebody would get up when somebody from the Greens party was holding the microphone and saying, what are you doing to work with Labor? Because in my experience, that doesn't happen so much. was, you know, I had all sorts of trouble going into the last election, I can tell you, and the one before that. I preferenced the Greens number 2. They didn't preference me. I'm the guy who was campaigning for gay marriage and climate action and, you know, a fair trade policy and rights for workers and all of this sort of stuff. You'd think I could have got a preference ahead of the Liberal Party, and I didn't.
This is Bruce Toms. I'm in the Progressive Labour Party, which is a left-wing party. Now, the left's got a lot of defensive issues to tackle, but they're very important, like on health and education, etc. But we don't want to be forced on the defensive all the time. Let's take up some offensive issues, like nationalising the banks. A lot of potential public support there. Let's tackle that one.
Stephen Jones, I don't know whether you remember me. I was CPSU delegate for quite a while. My name is Teck Lim from Centrelink, so I know I was a social worker for 20 odd years. The question is, I'm still not convinced why should I vote for you, because we only recently had seen the likes of Eddie Obeid, Craig Thompson, and you are saying that, oh, you have cleaned up the act. But I'm saying to you, it's like sour wine in new bottles. You have changed the wrapping, but inside is just as rotten to the core. And why didn't you implement Faulkner's reform? And the other day, Combe was here, and he said to me, I'm not going to rat on my mates in Parliament. What sort of an answer is that?
My name's Ellie Vasta. I'd like to ask you if you could, to both of you, if you could explain to me the difference between the left and the right in the Labor Party. It's not often very clear. And secondly, when we talk about the Greens and working with other parties, I mean, there is a general understanding that the progressive part of the Labor Party have moved over to the Greens. So, because of their disappointment with Labor, because Labor is no longer that party that represents progressives. So, yeah, if you could explain that to me, thanks.
There's 3, isn't it? No, we've got 3 already.
We've got 3? I'm sorry,
Yeah.
not the 3.
Yeah. Bruce was first.
It's always a disadvantage of being opening batsman. On nationalising banks, it didn't go so well last time. 47, I think it was, Bruce. Didn't go 49. Thank you. Yeah, High Court, a couple of High Court challenges. Look, I've got all sorts of complaints with the structure of the banking industry and all the rest of it, but if I've got 3 years in which to spend some political capital, it'll be around advancing health policy in this country, dealing with what I think is the very worrying encroachment of the private health insurance industry into primary care and general practice, about the defunding of hospitals and all of these sorts of things. It'll be around school education reform, it'll be around higher education reform, reinvesting in these sorts of things, reinvesting in the public sector. Frankly, you've got only so much political oxygen when you go into a 3-year term. Probably not going to spend it on something that ain't going to fly anyway. So it's about priorities. Secondly, a friend up the back has asked me about corruption and about the Faulkner reforms. I have spoken out quite strongly before, during and after the ICAC revelations on what has gone on between Messrs McDonald and Obeid. It is a complete defilement of everything that the Labor Party was founded on. They dishonour the name of Labor. Stronger words cannot be used. We will be marked down for that, no doubt, but it's what we do in response that matters. It is what we do in response that matters. They have been expelled, and John can speak in more detail about that. And we have to ensure that it never happens again. On the Faulkner reforms, I voted for them. I spoke in favour of them in at the last New South Wales conference. I'll speak in favour of them at the national conference, and if need to be at the next New South Wales conference until they happen. They will happen. I think it's inevitable. As Gough has taught us, sometimes the biggest and most important ideas have got to be campaigned for over a long period of time. I've been asked what the difference between, or what the things that the left stand for. I actually spent a bit of time talking about that. The difference between the left and right, well, we will always stand for the importance of the dignity of individuals, removing inequality, ensuring that the state, the government, the federal government takes a proactive role in dealing with all of those things. We believe that there is a role for government. We believe that markets have a place, but they are a means to an end and not an end in themselves. All of my friends within the right, we may agree with on many things, but not on all of those things. In terms of, I don't agree with your proposition, the well-known fact that everyone in the left has got up and joined the Greens. I didn't. They didn't in my seat, and they don't continue to do that in my seat. And can I say, if that is the temptation, then the very problem that you stand here and criticise us for will get worse. What do you think happens to the Labor Party if all of those people of goodwill and good politics pick up the bat and ball and go home? What do you think happens? We vacate the field to the very people we sometimes criticise. I don't think that's a good outcome for Labor. I don't think it's a good outcome for Australia, because I get back to the point, if you want progressive change in this country, you've got to get Labor to get on it, Labor to adopt it, and Labor to organise around it. We can form all the coalitions in the world, but you've got to get Labor to get on board.
So, I'll just jump in on two of those. I think Stephen's covered the field, but I did want to address directly the issues about the Labor Party and that were raised. Firstly, on corruption. Look, there's, this is, in my role, this is one of the things you end up dealing with very directly. And there's been some very big battles over the last couple of years inside the Labor Party to correct the appalling behaviour where the party was taken over by a very small gang of self-interested individuals who had incredible power. And it's taken some very big battles to get them out, but they are out. And they're not just out of the Labor Party in the short term. One of the things I moved at conference, and was supported unanimously by the Labor conference, was that we've expelled 7 of those key individuals for life from the Labor Party. They're out and we never want them back. And I think that's it was symbolic, but I think it's a very important symbol given the troubles that Labor's had. And just given how far they had strayed from the sort of values that the people who set up the Labor Party were about, and just the thousands of activists inside the party or in the union movement or in the community are for. So we fought, they really have been difficult, but I think we're in a much better place, and I don't say that lightly. On the question about the democratic reforms, look, I also voted for the Faulkner reforms at conference. I do think that, put these very specific reforms aside, the Labor Party is going to change on these issues because politics is changing. Our structures were set up really for the 19th century, when politics was conducted in meetings like this, debating ideas. Now it's fundamentally changed. Expectations about political engagement from a political party have fundamentally changed. What you're seeing is the start of Labor, along with political parties, adjusting to that new world. It's slow. It is going to be dramatic. This is just the start of the changes that we will go through, mainly because politics is changing. So that's a big debate that's still yet to happen, but there's just no question that these reforms and others that we are starting to see the beginning of, with community pre-selections, the community being directly involved, in political party activity. These are not just happening here, they're happening in our sister parties all the way around the world. And Labor is working to keep up, but there's going to be a lot more to come. On the difference between left and right, I'd just say two things. And we've talked about it a bit tonight, but for me, the two biggest differences are the left, in general, I think this is true of society, but in the Labor Party, are much more imaginative, much more prepared to actually think about the big ideas. That's a big difference for me when I look at the aspects of the party. But fundamentally, the view from the left of the party is you have to work with movements, you have to work with the public if you're ever going to win sustainably on social change. And that is just one of those fundamental things that distinguishes between the left and the right of the party.
Brian Forster is my name. I've heard tonight many times you say that you've got to get the people to support the ideas. Now, to do that, Stephen, you've got to get all of the people that live in your electorate to stop reading the Daily Terror and watching Australia's Got No Talent, stuff like that. The reality is, the man that is the most powerful media man in this country was mentioned in a court case in England as being not a suitable person to hold such a position.
Would you
And
formulate your question, please?
I will now, yeah. I would like to ask, why doesn't somebody grab hold of it and regulate media properly in this country, even if it will take big front page ads from the media press, of course, but we need the ABC to be fully funded, make sure that happens, regulate the other press, break up the barons.
Thanks, David McNart's my name. Just wondering, Stephen, you mentioned several times that ideas are very important. We've seen Chris Bowen in the Labor Party say that he thinks that the philosophy of the Labor Party should be social liberalism, which involves a big concession to the right, or a big an expression of ideas that there should be a big cap on government spending and taxation, and basically an idea of small government. I just wondered whether either of you had some ideas about what kinds of positive philosophical ideas could be put up to rebut him, because what he's doing is issuing a challenge on a kind of philosophical level about the deepest kind of values that Labor might stand for.
My question is principally addressed to John. My name is Maurice May. I've been a left-winger in the Labor Party for 50 plus years. I'm not a member of the faction, because I think that faction has become the Majesty's royal opposition in New South Wales. It has not promoted appropriate causes. It has been a party to the destruction of democratic process at state conferences. It has gone along with the right because it has picked up crumbs. Why is it that the left, the organised left, doesn't behave in a democratic fashion within the Labor Party in New South Wales?
Right, so I'm going to leave Stephen to deal with the media question. I'll just address those. Firstly to Maurice, who has been a long-term member of the Labor Party and a feature of Labor's national conferences. I'm confident we'll see him there again next year in July. Look, I don't agree with you, but I think it's fair to say that the left of the Labor Party is also a product of the Labor Party and a bit of a reaction to the right. So there is a genuine attempt in the left to create a democratic space where there can be real debate about some of these ideas, but it's a pretty tough party inside it. And that, that does honestly impact on how some of that works. So don't underestimate how much it is a genuine attempt to really have these debates and drive progressive ideas into the Labor Party. But also, of course, it's not perfect, so I think I take those criticisms seriously, and we can always be better. On the question about Chris Bowen and David's question, I think it's very important. Firstly, I'd like to congratulate Chris Bowen for having a big debate about some of these ideas. I think that's healthy, and I think Labor could do with more of it. Secondly, I really disagree with him about the direction he wants to take the Labor Party, and I think this idea about social liberalism and his subsequent idea about changing Labor's objectives need to be tackled head on, and I think we've got to defend the big traditions, the big social democratic traditions out of which Labor came. I do think that allows a better settlement on the role and size of government. It's a rejection of the small government view that some of those social liberals would like to see imposed, including on Labor. And crucially for me, I think it's a move away from some of the collectivist institutions, including the unions, but including a lot of the other collectivist institutions that have been very important to Labor's past and I think to the country's future. So, look, I think it's an important debate and we shouldn't be afraid of those big debates, but I hope it's one where Labor continues in the long tradition in which it started.
Thanks, John. Let me deal with the media question first. Well, the first thing, and as far as Rupert Murdoch goes, hello Rupert, we should stop pandering to them.
Yeah.
Let's just start with that. Stop pandering to them. As far as newspaper readership goes, I surprise you to know that once again, you guys in this room, if you're all newspaper readers or if you access your news via newspapers, you are in the minority of Australians. You're in the 12% that reads newspapers. So we should not overestimate the influence that they have. We should not underestimate it either, because they actually spend more time influencing the influencers than they do in terms of mass debate. In my area, I'm sort of pleased that there are a couple of Fairfax distributed local newspapers that actually filled the space. Off the back of today's profit results, I'm not that optimistic about their future, I've got to say. So that leads me to my second point. Increasingly alternative means of distributing news are filling the space that was once filled by our print newspapers. And old forms of traditional news are coming back. Radio is probably the principal source through which people get their news these days. And if you're a younger person, it's probably your social media networks. A hell of a lot of that is redistributed stuff off the back of mainstream media as well. We had a go at regulating, didn't go so well. We lost a fair bit of oxygen, we didn't explain it too well. People might remember the Finkelstein report and the work that we tried to do off the back of it. It didn't go so well. I'm not convinced that we will revisit that territory too quickly. I suspect the market and technology will be quicker to the punch. On the issue that you've raised, David, I'd be delighted to collaborate with you on some of the issues that you raise, or at least to engage in a discussion with you on it. Your book on Beyond Left and Right, probably going back about 10 years ago now, I think was an interesting contribution to the debate. I use that as a springboard to the Chris Bowen, Andrew Lee contribution, where basically they're arguing from different perspectives that Labor should rediscover Deaconite liberalism as the philosophical underpinnings of where we're going. And I think that's wrong for a whole bunch of reasons, but let me succinctly argue the case this way. As David says in his book of about 10 years ago, there are a whole bunch of things that we can collaborate with alternative political forces on that are beyond the narrow divides of left and right. There are a whole bunch of things that Labor agrees with the National Party on. There are a bunch of stuff that we agree with, the progressive parts of the Liberal Party on. There are a bunch of things that we agree with the Greens on, but that does not mean we are out of the same political, philosophical stable. And the damage, I think, that is done by Chris Bowen's thesis, although I welcome the debate, is this. It fails to understand that Labor is fundamentally an oral culture, which derives much of its strength from its oral traditions, and it's, I hope I don't do any assault to Aboriginal people saying the songlines, the storylines of Labor culture are critical to the way we think about ourselves. And if we adopt a philosophical position that says, well, all of that doesn't count for anything, we're going back to somebody who actually was the former, who was the guy who organised the liberal forces and the conservative forces in this country 100 years ago. We are ditching a rich tradition which ties the past to the future and disables us from making this fundamental point. The thing that motivated the socialists at the beginning of the last century, which is that desire to rid mankind, humankind, of the ravages from want, both social and intellectual and economic. They are the same things that motivate Labor today, and we believe the government has a fundamental role in redressing those imbalances. That's what I believe in. That's what the majority of it would say to a person the Labor left would believe in, and we'll engage in those broader debates with those who want to take us in a different direction.
I refer to the leadership team of the Labor Party. Can the Labor Party go further in reforming the way it selects its executives and its candidates in the future? And if it were to carry out further reform in this direction, how could it be done?
I'm Joy Goodsall from Sutherland branch of the ALP. I came because I'm reporting back to our branch, because our branch is the left-wing branch. No, I'm telling you it is, and it really is. And we're very proud of that. And some people have held the line much longer than I have. But I just wanted to tell you about what our branch members are really concerned about. And they're very concerned about refugees. They're very concerned about climate change. They are very concerned about the solar industry being destroyed. They're very concerned about the women's refuges being privatised. And I think that I think you're very brave coming. But I think that a lot of the Liberal policies will become evident to people. And I think that that's where we should be building our new agenda from the things that they're destroying. Because people are very concerned about Medicare, and they are extremely worried about their children's schools, because half of the kids, most of the private schools and the private hospitals are sucking the cream out of our essential services. So if you can build a new agenda which lets ordinary people know, then I think you've got your solution. And the branch members, they probably need mobilising, because they are your focus group.
Yes.
I'm Yola Lucia. I'm a whistleblower on healthcare corruption. However, I'd just like to say something about if the left, the Labor Party, wishes to lead on the issue of boat people, who are a very small proportion of asylum seekers, they should consider hiring Julian Burnside as a speechwriter.
Yes, here.
Or at least reading in great detail his speech to the Peace Foundation last night. Now my question. As I said, I'm a whistleblower on healthcare corruption, which starts with pharmaceutical industry, donations to parliamentarians, Liberal and state. In the United States, there is a False Claims Act with privatised prosecutions and rewards for whistleblowers. It is reaping tens of billions of dollars for state coffers. In the last Parliament, a False Claims Act was put together. The United States Department of Justice people came and looked at it. It was bipartisan. It now languishes. The bill languishes in the Department of the Attorney General's, where people tell me there is no political will to let it go. This kind of legislation can net billions of dollars for state coffers. Why is it languishing?
On that last one, Yola, I don't know much about it, but it sounds like a very good question, so I'm going to immediately give Stephen warning that he's going to answer that one. On the question about the leaders, though, I'm a little bit closer to that one. Look, the big change, I talked a little bit about how we're trying to tackle a change in politics, but what's the big change about how political parties are interacting these days in the world and trying to work? It's really this. They've gone from only working with their members to really reaching out to their supporters. That's the overall, if you summarise it, that's really what political parties are doing. Now that it's possible to do that through technology and through ways of genuinely interacting with far bigger groups of people. So the change I'd like to see driven through the Labor Party, both through our leadership elections, but also in the way we select our candidates, is to have far more of a role for our supporters, our genuine supporters, whether they're members or not, and our members should have.
We're moving towards a conclusion, and I'd like to raise that big question of inequality. Yes, of course, education and health are important, but underlying Labour values traditionally has always been an egalitarian sentiment, most fundamentally. And we haven't heard much about that tonight. Bruce Childs has distributed a leaflet on behalf of the Everett Foundation which talks about focusing on inequality. We've had books from Michael Lee, Andrew Lee, the Labour MP, about the growing inequality in Australian society. We know it's a global trend as a result of the blockbuster book by Thomas Piketty. What would Labour do to redress the tendency towards growing inequality in Australian society?
Darren McDonald. First thing I'd like to do is congratulate both of our speakers tonight for putting up with some fairly curly and challenging questions, so well done, guys. I think traditionally the role of the public sector and the size of the tax base to fund social services has been sort of key issues that have distinguished one as being part of the socialist left. An issue which gets talked about less often is the role of regulating and the role of regulators in regulating markets. In the last Labor government...
I'm sorry, but can you just formulate a question?
In the last Labor government...
Did you hear me? Can you just formulate a question rather than use all this background? We need a question. In the last Labor government, there was a Minister for Deregulation, and I think it was indicated that Stephen, you've got shadow responsibilities for regulating. I'm interested to know how Labor sees the role of regulating and what its sort of philosophical and policy position on that is. The Liberals clearly position the debate in terms of deregulation is good. By the same token, I think the left often errs on the side of being seen as supporters of red tape. Neither of those things are right, I think. The real answer is in good regulation and in fair and transparent regulators.
I've got a question regarding what proportion of the Labor Party, especially in state or federal level politics, what proportion has a technical background to appreciate technical issues such as commercialising education, medicine, farming, climate change? The reason I'm asking this is it seems as though at the moment our leaders seem to be coming from either professional political backgrounds or legal backgrounds, and they seem to be lacking in their technical awareness in the most fundamental issues to make wise decisions for both themselves and for the rest of the nation. Could you please comment on that?
Frank, thanks for raising the issue of inequality. I thought it was implicit in everything I said. If it wasn't in the foreground enough, can I say, look, clearly I agree. What would Labor do? More of what we did in government and ensuring that the stuff that we did put in place in government doesn't get unpicked in the meantime. I agree with Joseph Stiglitz when he made the observation that the great contribution that Australia, and by implication Australian Labor, has made to ensuring that we have less inequality in Australia compared to the US is trade unions. Because the best thing you can do to address inequality is to ensure that workers get a fair share of the profit share. I'd add to that what I know now is being called pre-distribution. We just used to call it social wage or public services and all of that sort of stuff. But I'd add to that the importance of universal rights and access to healthcare, universal rights and access to education, our interventions in the area of childcare and early childhood education. I think they are all critical, and as I said at the outset, you can't do any of those things except ensuring that you have strong, robust and responsible trade unions in the country. You can't do all of that sort of stuff unless you have a sustainable revenue base. I'll then refer to the comments that both John and I have made about having a sensible taxation discussion in this country. Darren, I think the most efficient way to deal with your question around regulation is to say, yes, I agree. It's not the amount of it, it's the quality of it that matters. And it's how you design markets, it's how you design regulation. And the problem with this government is they don't seem to know the difference between red tape and a guardrail. And we're all in favour of guardrails. And in the process of them trying to put on a big song and dance about burning legislation, they're getting rid of a lot of guardrails in the name of red tape reduction. In terms of the backgrounds of members of Parliament, I happen to believe that you need people from all sorts of walks of life. We do happen to have a range of different occupations and professions, but I think it's a strength of all political parties if you have people coming from a range of different backgrounds. I wouldn't want to get down to the level of prescribing different sorts of backgrounds. I actually think the best thing you can have as a Member of Parliament is a lot of empathy for the people that you're representing and a capacity to get across a brief pretty quickly, because the challenges, you might have thought you knew what the challenges were going to be when you got into Parliament, but they change almost on a monthly basis. So good generalists are probably just as important as having, you can always bring specialists in, but you need a good generalist with the right sort of values. I think that matters more than anything else. Thank you.
On those couple of issues, I'll work backwards. I think Labor should broaden the background of the people it puts into Parliament. I think that's important. I also want, though, people who know what they believe in and are prepared to fight for it. And I think that's also very important. We could do with some more MPs like that. On regulation, Darren, I agree with your position. It does remind me of one of the things that happened in government pushed by the deregulation crew, where they put up the proposal successfully to remove some of the regulations around lift mechanics. It really raised the question for me about why they were regulated in the first place and what might have led to that. So I think we've got to be careful before we undo some of these things. And lastly, Frank, on inequality, look, I think in some ways this is the most exciting bit of the big political debate at the moment. Some of the, particularly the Piketty development and just the amount of data to press home the case for where this debate's up to. The evidence is in on this issue. Inequality is holding back economies as well as impacting on people's lives. And I think where we've got to in this debate is a very exciting moment in politics. So I think we've got to continue to press that case. I apologise that we maybe haven't talked about it enough tonight, but it is, when I come back to those three values, which the left of the Labor Party very proudly says it's for, there were three of them that I referred to: social justice, equality and democracy. So it's just fundamental to the sort of values that we're trying to drive into the Labor Party.